Dundee United jumped back to the top of the Scottish Championship of the weekend after Raith Rovers' defeat to Airdrieonians, and Jordan Tilson's late winner at Inverness, despite United being down to 10 men. It would have been a valuable point for the managerless Inverness, who parted ways with Billy Dodds. So what next for the Highlanders? Joining us to talk about the future of the club is Andrew Young from Inverness Caley Thistle fan podcast, the Wyness Shuffle. Now, Andrew, did I say that right? Wyness Shuffle.
You did, aye, that's perfect, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, at all.
Look, it's always a shame to see a manager go, especially someone who's, fairly liked in Scottish football, unless you're not a fan. But Billy Dodds, just sum up his time in charge of Inverness. Was it the right time to part ways?
Yeah, I think it was definitely the right time to part ways, because I just didn't see him pulling it back this season. His kind of record overall as part of Caley Thistle manager has been kind of streaky. That's probably the best way of characterising it. He'd have these periods where he'd go on decent winning runs, and then he'd have these long periods where the club just kind of went into these slumps. And although there were mitigating factors like injuries and so on and so forth, there were games that he was losing and games where the team just wasn't performing, where you thought he probably could have done something to turn around games we shouldn't have been losing under any circumstances, injuries or no injuries. So this was the thing, he didn't really convince as a manager who could consistently get good dominating performances out of teams. And like in the last few seasons, he sort of saved himself by kind of going on these really good runs towards the end of seasons, which were kind of a bit too reliant, I think, on kind of short-term loan players, Rhys McAleer and Logan Chalmers 2 seasons ago, and then the boy Henderson and Dan Mackay to some extent last season. So there was always a sense in which it was kind of pulling things out of the fire. And I think for me, the reason this season that you felt it was time for him to go is after that really terrible start. When he was asked about, how they were going to turn it around, he kind of went, well, I know these boys are capable of going in good runs. We've shown it in the past. And he didn't take into account the fact that we'd lost 2, arguably 4 of our best players from last season. Robbie Dees and Scott Allardyce had been the backbone of the team for the last 2 seasons, 3 seasons. Henderson, Mackay were kind of like match winners last season as well. We don't have any of those. So there's no guarantee at all that this particular squad of players could go on these kind of like long winning runs that he's talking about. So it felt like he was really clutching at straws. So yeah, I think it was time for him to go. I think he maybe came in for a little bit too much criticism. There's people just wrote him off and said that he was completely useless. And I don't think that's fair. But I think he was, he was kind of streaky, and I think this season was just a season too far for him.
Mm. Obviously, we're recording this on Monday night, and it's probably been a fun Monday for Inverness fans, because there's been a lot of interest as to who the new manager might be, and there's a press conference called for Tuesday morning, probably about the time this podcast goes live, but it looks like there's going to be a new manager at the helm, and we understand it's going to be Duncan Ferguson that's going to be in the dugout. What's your take on that?
I'm pretty blown away, to be honest. I mean, my WhatsApp has been kind of going haywire all night, and the last couple of days, really, all the speculation, and there seem to be different favourites every hour or so. At one stage, yesterday, I think it was Imrie still on the picture yesterday, and then Davin O'Day, who seemed to be the club's favoured choice, that was rumoured. Then he was suddenly reported to have dropped out, and then at one point today, it was Jamie McAllister, who I don't think anyone wanted, given that he's just, I've got no experience as a number one, and was, like part of the Lee Johnson kind of debacle at Hibs. And then I think Scott Brown was also another name, and that was quite intriguing, obviously. And then I think it was like literally 20 minutes ago, 9 o'clock, suddenly it was just like, we know who it is, and it's Duncan Ferguson. And I just had no idea where it came from. It's jaw-dropping. I kind of almost wish it hadn't been leaked tonight, just to, see what the impact at the press conference would have been tomorrow if they'd actually managed to keep it completely secret. I mean, right, he's obviously obviously applied for it. Surely they're not going to go and sort of seek him out of all the names. So he's obviously put his hat in the ring. And when they saw it, they probably couldn't not give him an interview. And I assume he's impressed at interview. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's a huge gamble. He said one managerial job, Forest Green. I think he won his first of 18 games and didn't win a single one after that, as far as I know. I mean, admittedly, they were struggling at the time really badly, but then we're struggling, So, kind of like, is it the same sort of thing? You're pulling someone in to try and turn around a team that's kind of in the doldrums, and there's no guarantee he can do that. I suppose the positives are he's worked with young players at Everton, and he's probably going to have to work with some of our young players, and we do have good young players coming through, so that might be something. He's such a big name that it's probably going to be a pool for players when we are finally in a position to sign any, although I have no idea if he's going to have any budget. And then one other thing actually I've heard is that I think Gary Boland is coming in as his assistant manager. And really? Gary Boland's, obviously, well, that's what I've heard, yeah. Okay. And Gary Boland apparently is, well, he has got plenty of experience in the lower leagues. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember what his last job was, but he's bumped around these, the divisions for years, and he's obviously got connections in Scottish football. So that's something. I mean, that's something about Ferguson. I mean, what's he, 25 years in England? I don't know what his connections in Scotland are like. So, yeah, I'm really intrigued. I'm kind of excited. I'm also absolutely terrified. It could be an absolute disaster. I think, he's more of a gamble than say Kevin Thompson, who's another name that's been mentioned, would have been. He's more of a gamble, I think, even than Scott Brown would have been, because Brown did have some decent spells at Fleetwood. Someone like Ian McCall would have been someone with experience. I think Ferguson's a much bigger gamble than all of those. But I mean, fair play. We've kind of kept it interesting anyway.
Who knows? Is it potentially something that because it seems like a bit of a change of pace, I would say, from Caley Thistle in terms of a managerial appointment. Do you think it's maybe something that is needed to kind of freshen things up? Because looking at, you don't tend to be a club that go through managers too quickly. And the last couple of managers, like Billy Dodds and John Robertson, in terms of personality and background and pedigree and the way that they kind of operate, seem relatively similar. And, they're not flashy characters. They're, very good professionals. They're quite steady. And Duncan Ferguson just seems to be quite a departure from that kind of thing. But do you think that's the kind of thing that might actually ignite the club a little and freshen things up?
Possibly. I mean, I think it'll probably attract some fans in for the sort of the circus type factor. What's going on here, sort of thing. So I think it'll have a bit of that. I mean, that sort of thing only gets you so far. Yeah. If he's not successful, then that. People disappear pretty quickly, And that's, I don't want to prejudge him. He might well be successful. So I see what you're saying, but whether that justifies the gamble. I mean, I suppose if there's any precedent for it, because, think about previous managers. Obviously, you missed Neil McCann was in there temporarily. He's another one that's kind of like, basically all these people you'll find, if they're not in a managerial job, they're going to be on the couch in Sports Sound of a Saturday afternoon. John Hughes is the same, although, I mean, Hughes obviously was great for us for a couple of seasons. But he's another one that kind of fits that profile to some extent. And the one kind of outlier there would be Richie Foran, but then that was a cheap option. So the last time we did anything that maybe approaches this would have been Terry Butcher. Very big name, very big personality. But Butcher did have quite a pedigree in Scottish football, and I actually had a couple of good seasons with Motherwell, so I don't think it was the same sort of gamble. So it might, I think in terms of shaking things up, and I think our chief executive is probably not averse to trying to shake things up and do things like that. But it's we'll see.
I would really have liked to have sat in that meeting, that interview. Whether or not he was impressive or intimidating, just to see how he comes across. Because I think he is a good character to have back in Scottish football. And the funny thing, not a funny thing, but the interesting thing is, he was so well liked at Everton, and you do hope that he could. I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's pretty much going to be nice. The attraction of players. Young players, clubs in lower league levels, they have to support their teams with more young, exciting players coming in. And if he does have contacts down in England to bring up, I think Everton's going to be quite an interesting pool. But do you think that the current playing squad should be doing better? Are you encouraged by anything about the current playing squad?
I mean, there are definitely positives there. There are some talented players in the team. The two very good young boys coming through. So there's a guy called Keith Bray coming through. He's only 17, and he's got a real fearlessness about him. He'll just take players on. He doesn't hide. He's pretty strong actually for such a young boy, and he's quick and he will try things. He's very direct as well. So I like him. And there's a boy called Robbie Thompson that started on Saturday, and he had some lovely touches as well. So they're good players, but you're not going to build a team around them. They could be the sort of players that maybe someone like Duncan Ferguson could get even more out of and really build them up. But we need kind of like far greater experience and kind of players to stand up around them. So I mean, the best players kind of like in that respect, Nathan Shaw came through at the end of last season. When he first signed last season, he looked like a really sort of ungainly sort of character and made as many mistakes as he did kind of things well. But actually, he's one of these guys that when you start to get to know him as a player, very, very sort of tenacious, very hard to get the ball off, good crossing him, can really kind of beat players. But I think we potentially have tried to rely on him too much this season. Louis Longstaff, who came in from Cove, he's just showing little signs here and there. I think he's talented, maybe a little bit lightweight, but you can tell he's got a bit about him. Max Anderson is on loan from Dundee. He's looked decent since he's come in. So yeah, I mean there are positives there, but there this it seems to be a bit of a lack of leadership in the park. David Carson maybe he's got a bit about him, but I think he needs to step up more. Danny Devine, I think for an experienced centre half, just seems awfully kind of error prone and a bit quiet on the park. We've put a lot of store by giving Billy Mackay this kind of 2-year new deal this season, but I don't think we really know who to partner him with to get the best out of him. So he seems to be dropping deep, to try and make things happen. And so we're scoring next to nothing at the moment.
Sounds like a bit of structure is just missing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, these players are like, Austin Samuels will be dropped in and never really seems to know where he's supposed to be playing. Or, there's this boy Lodovica who signed, the massive striker who seems to have been signed purely for the size of him, and I don't think it doesn't look like a footballer to me. Young boy called Adam Brooks came in, looked like a bit of a potential like talent from Celtic, but I think maybe just a wee bit young yet. So I just think there's definitely gaps there, and we're missing Sean Welsh, which is unfortunately, no one's surprised by that because his injury record's appalling, but he is a big loss when we don't have him.
Just quickly, because we don't have much time, Andrew. The club's been fairly honest with its financial struggles in recent seasons. Are you happy with how the club's being run at the moment? Do you think there's anything more to worry about?
I really don't know. I mean, I think, there's definitely things that the club could be doing better. There's no question about that. Communication with the supporters is really poor. The kind of like some of the treatment, the way that players have, departing players have kind of reported the way they've been let go, that just is a really bad look for the club. The local marketing of the club, I think, is really poor. We've got next to no presence in the city centre, and even when kind of volunteer fans, our fans try and volunteer to do things like that, they're not really, offers aren't being kind of engaged with, and so on and so forth. And then every couple of months you might get this overlong, very defensive kind of statement talking about how well things are going, and then they go quiet again. So I think communication is really poor. In terms of what they're doing financially, I think that's very hard to kind of... The board comes in for enormous criticism, but I think it's very hard really to know what more they can be doing, because the crowds aren't great. They need to be getting income streams from somewhere locally. They claim to be trying to do that, but they obviously don't want to kind of go into too much detail about how they're trying to do that. And I think there's a case of be careful what you wish for, because if, say Ross Morrison, the chairman, decided to walk away, if Gardner gets forced out, then do we know if there's someone better or someone more able to kind of tap into those income streams waiting in the wings? I don't know. So it doesn't feel like it's being terribly well run at the moment, but I also think that it's incredibly difficult for any club of our size to make money, especially when the crowds are as low as they are at the moment. So it's really, really hard to answer that with any great authority.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the new manager does create a bit more of a buzz around the place. I know he tried to kind of create a closer connection in Nailsworth, although it's not very hard in Forest Green. There's only about 5,000 people in Nailsworth. It's the smallest football league club ever, I think. Pretty
even smaller than Ross County. That's
well, this is it. But I mean, the thing is, Inverness is a beautiful place. So I mean, even to play your football around that area is a pretty. I think someone like Duncan Ferguson will get it. Nice one, Andrew. Top man. Really good to have you on the podcast, and best of luck for the season.
Thanks so much for joining us, man.
Might get you back on.
Okay. All right. Cheers. Appreciate that. Yeah, happy to help. Okay. Cheers.
All the best.
Thanks so much, man.